The first signs of the Sci-Fi's arrival were subtle: a ripple in the electromagnetic field, a flicker in satellite communications, but it didn't take long for humanity to realize something was terribly wrong. At first, the governments of Earth assumed it was an intergalactic anomaly, something natural, a passing celestial body. The idea of an alien invasion seemed too fantastical, but the night they arrived, the Sci-Fi made sure that no one could ignore their presence. It began with a blinding flash over the oceans, a massive energy surge that lit up the skies like a second sun. The first city to fall was New York. The Sci-Fi didn't waste time with subtlety. They unleashed their devastating weaponry from orbit. City blocks were reduced to rubble, and skyscrapers were vaporized in mere seconds. Then came the ground assault. Sci-Fi war machines, towering and lethal, descending from the sky. Their feet shattered the pavement as they advanced with unrelenting precision, mowing down anything in their path. Ethan Walker was there, stationed in New York with his unit, just days after receiving a commendation for his bravery in a local conflict. The crackle of his comms was drowned out by explosions, but he could still hear his commander's frantic orders. "Hold the line. We need tow." But then the sky tore open above them. Without warning, a pulse of energy from one of the Sci-Fi warships blasted across the city. Walker's heart skipped a beat as the shockwave lifted him off his feet, sending him crashing into a nearby building. He struggled to get up, disoriented, blood dripping from his forehead. His squad mates, his friends, were gone, vaporized in an instant. He was alone. The scene around him was chaos. Screams, fires, the acrid stench of burning metal. But even in the midst of destruction, Walker's military training kicked in. He dragged himself to cover, his pulse pounding in his ears. He couldn't afford to panic. Not now. In the distance, he saw them, the Sci-Fi soldiers. They moved like shadows, sleek and armored, their weapons glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. Human soldiers were scattered, retreating, trying to regroup. But it was clear, they were nothing more than targets. The Sci-Fi didn't seem to care. They were methodical, surgical in their destruction. Earth's military was like a toy being crushed beneath their fingers. "Command, we need extraction, now," Walker shouted into his radio, but the signal was lost in a burst of static. For hours, Walker fought to survive. He wasn't a hero yet, just a soldier struggling to hold on. He saw others like him, brave but outmatched, doing everything they could to resist, even though they knew it was hopeless. Then, as the sun began to set, casting a strange orange hue over the wreckage of New York, a figure approached. A soldier in a tattered uniform, a woman with a grim expression, appeared at Walker's side. She extended a hand. "We need you, Walker," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The resistance needs people like you." He hesitated, looking at the devastation around them. Humanity had no chance against these monsters. But then, in the darkest corner of his mind, something shifted. What if we did? He gripped her hand, his resolve hardening. "Lead the way," he said, the fire of defiance burning within him for the first time. In the days following the destruction of New York, the world began to feel the weight of the Sci-Fi's dominance. They didn't just conquer, they devastated. Every major city was leveled by the invaders' terrifying weapons, leaving only a scattered remnant of humanity clinging to life in the wilderness, in the shadows. The global governments collapsed under the pressure, and society fractured. Nations fell into chaos as refugees fled to underground bunkers, seeking safety from the constant assault from above. Captain Ethan Walker found himself among a small group of survivors in a makeshift camp hidden deep in the Appalachian Mountains. The resistance fighters here were not soldiers, but ordinary civilians. Doctors, farmers, engineers, and even former criminals, all united by a single goal: survival. No one had ever truly expected to be in a war like this, but now they had no choice but to fight. When Walker arrived at the camp, the mood was dark. The group was beaten, demoralized. They had no formal training, and their weapons were cobbled together from what little they had scavenged from the wreckage of their cities. Supplies were low. Hope even lower. "You're Captain Walker, right?" a young man asked, his voice thick with both awe and skepticism. His name was Seth, a former mechanic who now patched up the Resistance's equipment. "I heard you were at New York. You led people out when the city fell." Walker nodded silently, his gaze distant. The battle still haunted him, the faces of the fallen, the feeling of helplessness. He was just a soldier, no hero, no savior. But now, this small band of survivors was looking to him for leadership, something he hadn't been trained for. "We don't have the resources to go toe-to-toe with the HFY," Seth continued, scratching his chin. "But we can't just hide forever." Walker took a deep breath, his mind spinning. The Sci-Fi had superior technology and overwhelming numbers, but humanity's strength wasn't in brute force. It was in their resilience, their adaptability. That was something that Sci-Fi couldn't predict. "I don't know about saving the world," Walker said, "but I do know this. If we fight smart, if we use what we have, we can strike back. We can make them pay for every life they've taken." A murmur spread through the group. The seed of hope was planted. Walker's words were raw, unpolished, but they ignited something inside them, the need to fight, to survive, to do something. The time for hiding was over. Walker wasted no time. He began training the survivors, ordinary civilians transformed into guerrilla fighters. They learned how to use weapons, how to move quietly through the terrain, how to strike quickly and retreat. They improvised explosive devices from scrap materials, crafted makeshift armor from salvaged alien tech. Even those with no combat experience found their purpose in the fight, whether it was repairing vehicles, patching up injuries, or gathering intelligence. For weeks, they worked in secrecy, honing their skills, building their strength. They launched small, but successful, raids on Sci-Fi supply lines. At first, the invaders barely noticed. But each attack, no matter how minor, sent a clear message. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. One night, as Walker sat in the shadows, reviewing maps of the Sci-Fi's deployment, a small group of resistance fighters returned from a raid with startling news. They had found a weak point in the Sci-Fi's command structure, an isolated communications hub, lightly guarded. "This could be our chance," Walker murmured, eyes burning with the fire of purpose. "If we take this out, we might have a shot at turning the tide." The rebellion was no longer just a handful of people in hiding. It was becoming a force that was small, scrappy, and inexperienced, but fiercely determined. They may have been weaklings in the eyes of the invaders, but to Walker and those who had joined him, they were becoming something much more. Weeks passed, and the Resistance's small victories began to stir whispers of hope across the devastated planet. Though their successes were modest, attacks on supply convoys, sabotaging communication towers, freeing captured prisoners, each strike made one thing clear: the humans weren't giving up. Captain Ethan Walker had grown from reluctant leader to tactician, directing his band of guerrilla fighters with precision. But the reality remained: humanity was outmatched. The Sci-Fi had vast resources, devastating technology, and an army that seemed endless. Even with their victories, Walker knew they were still punching far above their weight. They couldn't win this war by simply fighting with the weapons they had. They needed to understand their enemy. The breakthrough came when one of their scouts, Lena, a former intelligence officer from a fallen government agency, brought back crucial information. A Sci-Fi command post hidden deep in the mountains, far from the major conflict zones. From the encrypted data she retrieved, Lena was able to confirm something humanity had feared for months. There was a way to defeat the Sci-Fi. But it wasn't in the weapons they had stolen or the strategies they had devised. It lay in their enemy's weakness. The Sci-Fi were not invincible. This is it," Lena said, her voice trembling as she scanned through the data. "They've been using a kind of bioengineered virus to control their soldiers, a parasitic organism that rewrites their DNA. But there's a flaw, a genetic vulnerability in the Cipher genome that we can exploit. Walker's mind raced. You're telling me there's something in their biology we can target, something we can use against them? Lina nodded. Yes, but it's not easy. The virus itself is part of their genetic makeup. It strengthens their warriors, makes them more resilient. But it's also their Achilles heel. The Cipher's own technology might hold the key to breaking it. Walker leaned over the data, his fingers grazing the holographic map that Lina had activated. Where do we find this tech? It's at an old research facility, she said, her eyes narrowing. It's in the Arctic. The Cipher have been studying human resistance there. They think we're too primitive to fight back. But if we can get to their lab, there's a chance we can turn the tide. It was a dangerous mission, possibly a suicide run. The research facility was heavily guarded, and the area was a desolate, frozen wasteland. The Cipher had established it far from civilization for a reason. It was considered an impenetrable fortress. But for the first time since the invasion, Walker felt something stirring inside him. Hope, not as an abstract concept, but as something tangible. A weapon, a chance to truly fight back. We don't have much time, Walker said, his voice hard with resolve. We move at dawn. This could be our last chance. The plan was simple but perilous. A small, specialized team. Walker, Lina, a few trusted resistance fighters, and Hank, a brilliant but untested hacker, would infiltrate the Arctic base, extract the Cipher data, and return with whatever they could find. If they succeeded, they could disrupt the Cipher's control over their own soldiers. But failure meant certain death. As Walker looked over the faces of his team, he could see the same fire in their eyes that had lit his own after the destruction of New York. They were no longer just survivors, they were fighters. The people who would decide whether humanity had a future or would be wiped from the galaxy. Let's move out, Walker ordered, his voice steady. For Earth. For the future. The Arctic facility was a ghostly place, a desolate expanse of ice and snow where the wind howled like a living thing. As Walker and his small team navigated the harsh terrain, the weight of their mission pressed down on them. The lives of billions rested on what they could extract from this bleak, fortified base. Failure wasn't an option, but the odds were stacked against them. They had been briefed by Lina about the Cipher's research. The facility was heavily guarded by automated drones and reinforced by energy shields that would make any direct assault impossible. The only way in was through an underground tunnel system, a remnant of the facility's previous use before the Cipher's arrival. It was a risky plan, but it was their best shot. Walker's team had made it to the edge of the facility, and as they moved into the snow-covered tunnels beneath the base, they could feel the pulse of tension running through their veins. The hum of distant machinery, the thrum of alien technology, echoed in the cold, reinforcing the sense that they were entering the belly of the beast. "We've got one shot at this," Walker whispered, eyes scanning the narrow passageways as they crept forward. Lina nodded grimly. "The research lab is directly under the core building. We need to find the terminal, extract the data, and get out. Fast." The atmosphere in the tunnel grew heavy as they advanced deeper into the Cipher stronghold. The team was on edge, but it wasn't the alien technology that gave them pause. It was the cold reality that their success was far from guaranteed. Just as they were about to breach the main facility, Walker's radio crackled with static. "Walker, this is Hank," came the voice of the Resistance's hacker. "I got an incoming transmission. You won't like this." Before he could continue, the air around them seemed to vibrate with an unnatural hum, a tremor of distant power that sent shivers down Walker's spine. He motioned for the team to halt. They were too close to the core to risk being detected now. "What is it?" Walker asked, his voice tight with tension. "The Cipher. They've deployed a fleet to Earth. They're calling it Operation Purge. It's a full-scale bombardment to wipe out what's left of humanity, to finish what they started," Hank replied. "They're not just holding Earth, they're planning to annihilate every last resistance." Walker clenched his fists, fury flooding his veins. The Sci-Fi weren't just conquerors. They were tyrants, willing to obliterate entire worlds to maintain their control. But this was no longer about mere survival. It was about revenge, about proving that humanity would not bend, would not be crushed. "They're making their move now, while we're in the dark," Lena muttered, her face pale with the realization of what was at stake. "We need that data, Walker. Now." Walker's eyes hardened with resolve. "We'll get the data, and we'll get it out. No one's dying here. Not today." But just as they prepared to push forward, an unexpected presence made itself known. Out of the shadows emerged a figure, tall and angular, with skin that shimmered with a silvery blue hue. It was one of the Shalrani, the telepathic warriors humanity had heard about but never truly understood. Despite the stories of their ruthlessness, this one didn't look hostile. In fact, it looked almost cautious. "We've been watching." The Shalrani spoke, their voice echoing in Walker's mind like a whispered thought. "And we're here to help." Walker's eyes widened. He had heard of the Shalrani, but their race had been isolated from human affairs for centuries, known only as cold, calculating beings who had never deigned to engage in the war. "Why?" Walker demanded, his tone sharp. "You've never been interested in our fight. Why show up now?" The Shalrani's eyes glimmered. "Because your enemy is also our enemy. The Sci-Fi's influence is spreading across the galaxy. We've watched them burn our worlds, destroy our people. This ends now." Walker felt the weight of the moment. An alliance with the Shalrani, once considered impossible, was now within reach. They were the key to turning the tide. But would they be enough? "We need to move," the Shalrani continued. "We'll provide the diversion while you extract the data. But know this, if the Sci-Fi detect our involvement, it will be a war not just for Earth, but for every sentient species they've enslaved." Walker's thoughts raced. This was it, the turning point. Humanity had always been seen as weak, insignificant. But with the Shalrani's help, they could stand shoulder to shoulder with one of the galaxy's most feared races. "Then let's make sure they never see us coming," Walker said, his voice low but filled with determination. The Sci-Fi base loomed ahead, its towering structure shrouded in the ice and snow of the Arctic landscape. Despite the cold, Walker could feel the heat of urgency in his chest. The Shalrani warrior, who introduced themselves as Kale, led the way as the team approached the final obstacle before the facility. "We will disable their perimeter defense systems," Kale said, their voice calm but resolute. "But once we're inside, we'll be vulnerable. You must get to the core lab and extract the data quickly." Walker nodded. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for, but the sense of finality didn't settle in. This wasn't just a raid. It was a fight for humanity's survival, and for a chance to strike back at the Sci-Fi's overwhelming power. The plan was simple. Kale and the Shalrani would create a diversion to draw the majority of the Sci-Fi's forces away from the main entrance. Meanwhile, Walker's team would infiltrate the underground tunnels and reach the core lab. The data was humanity's only shot at developing a weapon capable of neutralizing the Sci-Fi's biological advantage. "Stay close," Walker ordered as they approached the entrance. "Once we're in, there's no going back." Kale moved swiftly, their form barely visible in the blizzard-like conditions. As they crossed into range of the facility's defensive perimeter, Walker's comms crackled to life. "This is Hank. The Sci-Fi are scrambling their forces. It's now or never." The team moved into position, their breaths visible in the cold air as they crouched low against the icy walls of the facility. Kale raised their arm, signaling the start of the diversion. Moments later, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the other side of the base, followed by a violent explosion that sent a shockwave through the snow. The ground trembled beneath them as alarms blared within the facility. "We're in," Walker said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. "Let's move." The resistance team sprinted towards the entrance, their footsteps muffled by the falling snow. They entered through a hidden hatch Cal had disabled earlier, the heavy door sealing behind them with a hiss. Inside, the facility was eerily silent, the hum of machinery the only sound. Lena, the former intelligence officer, led the way through the winding corridors, her eyes scanning the walls as she accessed the facility's schematics. "It's just ahead," she whispered. "The core lab is below us, but there are Cipher patrols. At least 3 guards stationed near the elevator shaft." Walker motioned for the team to hold position. They could hear footsteps coming closer, the unmistakable clanking of Sci-Fi armor. The Sci-Fi were unlike any enemy the humans had faced, emotionless, efficient, and relentless. "We'll have to take them out quietly," Walker said. "Seth, you're up." Seth, the former mechanic, nodded and crouched low, using his knowledge of Sci-Fi technology to hack into the facility's door control panel. He bypassed the security system with surprising ease, opening the door silently. They ambushed the guards as they rounded the corner, taking them out in swift, calculated moves. The Cipher soldiers were stronger, faster, but the humans had learned to fight differently, by exploiting their weaknesses, their unpredictable responses to guerrilla tactics. "Clear," Seth muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. With the path ahead momentarily safe, they moved down the corridor to the elevator shaft. "This is it," Walker said, as the team gathered around the control panel. "Once we're inside, we go straight for the terminal. We don't have much time." Lena slid her hand over the console, bypassing the final security lock. The elevator doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the team stepped inside, their hearts pounding in synchrony. As the elevator descended, the tension in the air was palpable. Every minute they spent inside the Sci-Fi base increased their risk of detection. And outside, Kale and the Shalrani warriors were buying them time. Time they couldn't afford to waste. The doors opened to the heart of the research lab, a large, dimly lit room filled with strange, otherworldly machinery. And there, sitting at the center, was the terminal they needed, the one that held the key to humanity's future. Lena immediately moved to the terminal, her fingers flying across the keys as she worked to access the data. But as she did, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from behind them. The Sci-Fi were closing in. "Almost done," Lena said, sweat beading on her forehead as the terminal began to hum with life. Walker's eyes scanned the room, calculating their next move. They needed to get out now. "Just a little longer," Lena urged, her voice strained. Suddenly, the facility's alarms blared even louder, the sound deafening as the unmistakable sound of Sci-Fi reinforcements approached. They were running out of time. The Sci-Fi's footsteps grew louder, echoing off the sterile walls of the research lab. Sweat dripped down Lena's forehead as she typed furiously, her fingers moving over the terminal with a sense of desperate urgency. The air seemed to grow heavier, charged with the tension of imminent discovery. "Lena, hurry up." Walker's voice was a low hiss, barely audible as he motioned for the others to stay alert. He and Seth were positioned at the entrance, weapons ready, eyes darting to every shadow. The sound of alien footsteps was unmistakable. Soon, they would be here. "I'm trying," Lena snapped, her voice tight with stress. "This system is more complicated than I thought. It's like a fortress in here." Walker's hand clenched around his rifle. "You've got 5 minutes, Lena. After that, we're gone. We won't get another chance." Seth was scanning the corridor nervously. "We need to move. Now." But before they could react, the lab doors burst open with a deafening hiss. In the doorway stood 3 heavily armed Sci-Fi soldiers, their angular forms towering over the humans. Their glowing red eyes locked onto the team immediately. They had been spotted. "Engage," Walker shouted. In a flash, gunfire erupted in the confined space, the sharp cracks of human weapons clashing with the Sci-Fi's energy shields. Seth fired first, taking out the nearest soldier with a well-placed shot to the chest. But the Sci-Fi were relentless. Their shields flickered, absorbing the impact, and their counterattacks were devastating. Energy beams zipped through the air, narrowly missing Walker as he dove for cover. "Lena, now!" Walker yelled, his voice urgent as he ducked behind a steel pillar. The sound of plasma fire sizzled past him, striking the walls around them. There was no room for hesitation. Lena, ignoring the chaos around her, pressed a series of commands into the terminal. The machine hummed to life, and with a final keystroke, the data began to transfer. A series of holographic screens appeared above the console, showing alien schematics, cipher genetic profiles, and, most importantly, a blueprint for the virus that controlled their soldiers. This was the key to ending the Cypher's dominance. "I've got it," Lena shouted, her voice trembling with triumph. "The data's secure. We need to get out of here." But before they could celebrate, the ground beneath them rumbled, and a deafening roar echoed from above. The sound of heavy machinery echoed from the ceiling, followed by a loud crash as the lab's security doors slammed shut, sealing them inside. "Locked in," Seth growled, banging his fist against the unyielding door. "Great. Now what?" "We fight," Walker said, his voice low but firm. He looked over at Kel, the Shalorani warrior who had entered the room to provide support. Kel's eyes glinted with fierce determination. "Give us time," Kel said, their voice telepathic. "We'll hold them off." Walker's pulse quickened. Time was the one thing they didn't have. The Cypher reinforcements would be here any second, and they were no match for the advanced alien warriors. But Kel's presence was a blessing. The Shalorani's telepathic abilities gave them an edge over the Cypher. They could sense the enemy's movements, predict their attacks. "Kel, we need an escape route," Walker said, his voice urgent. "I've already begun," Kel replied. They moved with uncanny precision, weaving through the chaos and setting up a series of barriers that would buy the team time to escape. But as the Cypher soldiers advanced, their weapons humming with deadly energy, Walker knew they couldn't stay much longer. The lad was closing in on them, the walls shaking with each passing moment. The ground trembled beneath them, and outside, the sound of Cypher reinforcements closing in was deafening. Walker turned to Lena. "Get that data out of here. We're not losing this." Lena nodded, clutching the portable drive containing the data, the most precious cargo humanity had ever had. Her eyes were filled with resolve, but there was fear there too. The Cypher had already shown how far they would go to crush resistance, and they were willing to die to prevent this information from escaping. Kel turned back to Walker. "We will protect you," they said, their voice cold and commanding. "Go. Now." Walker gave a sharp nod. They didn't have a choice. The team quickly began their retreat, but the path out was narrow, and the Cypher were closing in fast. As the group rushed down the hallway, a sudden explosion rocked the building, sending shockwaves through the walls. Walker turned just in time to see a column of fire erupt from behind them, blocking the Cypher soldiers' advance. Kel had set a trap. "Go, go, go," Walker shouted, pushing the team forward. The narrow corridor ahead seemed to stretch endlessly before them. The sound of pursuing Cypher soldiers grew louder, echoing off the cold, metallic walls. Walker could hear the clanking of their boots, the ominous hum of their energy weapons charging, and the shrill buzz of their comm systems. Time was running out. "Keep moving," Walker barked, his voice hoarse, as he urged the team forward. They had the data. They had to get out. The blueprints for the virus, the genetic codes that would disable the Cypher's control over their soldiers, were safely stored in Lena's hands, but the cost of getting this far had been immense. They had lost precious time, and the longer they stayed inside the facility, the more likely it was they'd be caught. Behind them, the explosions continued, the sound of Kel's traps slowing the Cypher forces, but for how long? The Shalorani warrior was their last line of defense, but even Kel couldn't hold back the entire enemy force forever. "There's an extraction point 2 floors up," Lena said, her voice tight with strain as she sprinted beside Walker. "I've mapped it out. We need to get to the surface. There's a shuttle waiting for us. 2 floors. Walker shot her a sharp look. It's too far. The Sci-Fi will be all over us before we make it. We don't have a choice. Lena snapped back, her eyes wide with desperation. That's our only shot. Walker cursed under his breath, but he didn't argue. He had seen Lena work miracles before, and if she said that was the only way, then it was. But as they raced through the labyrinthine hallways, the harsh reality of their situation began to sink in. The Sci-Fi were everywhere, and they were closing in fast. The sound of their enemies' weapons firing echoed in the corridors, and Walker had no doubt that the next blast could be the one that ended it all. The team had been lucky so far, but luck was a dwindling commodity. We're almost there, Lena said, though there was no confidence in her voice. It was just a statement of fact. They were close, but so were the Sci-Fi. The team rounded a corner, only to be met with the sight of a group of Sci-Fi soldiers, their armored figures blocking the path to the elevator shaft. Walker swore loudly, his grip tightening around his rifle. They're everywhere. Seth shouted, his voice filled with panic. We're trapped. For a split second, time seemed to slow. The team had nowhere to go. The elevator was just ahead, but the Sci-Fi's firepower was too overwhelming. Walker's mind raced. There had to be a way out. He wasn't about to let them die here, not after everything they'd fought for. Without thinking, Walker dropped to one knee, drawing a grenade from his vest. Cover me, he shouted as he pulled the pin. He hurled it toward the cluster of Sci-Fi soldiers, diving to the side. The explosion that followed was deafening, shaking the walls and sending a burst of flames through the hallway. The Sci-Fi were momentarily stunned, their ranks scattered by the blast. Walker seized the opportunity. Now, he ordered, his voice sharp and commanding, get to the elevator. The team sprinted forward, the blast still ringing in their ears as they dove for cover. The elevator doors slid open with a soft hiss, and they piled in, their breath coming in ragged gasps. As the doors sealed, the elevator shot upward, the tremors of distant explosions vibrating through the floor. Walker barely had time to catch his breath before the alarm sounded again, a high-pitched whine that made his skin crawl. The Sci-Fi were relentless. Lena was already on the comms, her face lit up by the light of her device. The shuttle is en route. We're going to make it. I hope you're right, Walker muttered, watching the floor indicator climb. The shuttle would only be waiting for so long. But just as they thought they had a moment to breathe, the elevator jerked to a halt with a violent lurch. Walker's stomach lurched with it. What the hell? Seth yelled, his hand going to his sidearm. Lena quickly scanned the system. The Sci-Fi must have disabled the elevator. We're stuck. Walker's heart sank. Every second that passed brought them closer to being trapped in the heart of enemy territory. And with every minute, their chances of survival dwindled. Think, Walker, think, he muttered to himself. His hand clenched into a fist. He couldn't let this be the end. We'll fight our way out, Walker said, his voice hard with resolve. We don't stop until we're off this base. The elevator shuddered, then remained still. The soft hum of the machinery ceased, leaving only the distant sounds of the Sci-Fi forces closing in, their boots echoing with deadly intent. Walker's heart raced. Their options were quickly running out. Okay, we're trapped, Seth said, his voice a mix of disbelief and frustration. Any brilliant ideas, Walker? Walker clenched his fists, taking a deep breath. We don't have time to argue. We make our stand here and now. Lena was already pulling up her interface, her fingers flying over the controls. The elevator's completely locked down. We'll need to find another way out. She paused, eyes narrowing. There's an emergency access tunnel 2 floors below us, but the elevator system's been sabotaged. It's a long shot, but it's the only option we have. Then we're taking it, Walker said, his voice hard as steel. He gestured for everyone to follow him, pulling out a grenade and a combat knife. They had no choice but to fight their way down. Kale, the Shalorani warrior, was already stepping forward, their eyes gleaming with purpose. "Let us handle the front lines," Kale said, their voice low, almost reverent. "We will hold them off while you move forward." Walker met Cal's gaze. The Shalorani had proven themselves invaluable since their unlikely alliance, but Walker couldn't help the concern that crept into his mind. "No, Kale. We stick together. We'll all make it out of here." But Kale shook their head. "This is the way. We know that Sci-Fi better than you do. The diversion will give you time. You must go. Our people have fought for centuries for this moment." Before Walker could protest, Kale was already moving toward the elevator doors, their telepathic abilities reaching out to sense the enemy's movements. Without another word, Kale raised their hand, and the air around them crackled with an intense energy that made the hair on the back of Walker's neck stand up. "Go," Kale commanded. The doors opened, and a wave of Sci-Fi soldiers poured in. Kale's eyes flared with power, and that Sci-Fi were momentarily thrown back, as if caught in an invisible force. Kale's movements were graceful but lethal, striking with a precision and speed that left no room for mercy. "We've got to move," Lena urged, her voice tight with panic as she looked to Walker for direction. "Now," Walker barked. "Get to the tunnel." The team bolted for the emergency exit, taking the winding stairwell that led to the lower levels of the facility. Each step felt like a race against time as the sounds of battle erupted behind them, echoing through the narrow staircases. The elevator shaft was long, too long for comfort, but it was the only way out. The team descended as quickly as they could, the tension mounting with every passing second. They could still hear the sounds of gunfire and explosions above them, but they dared not look back. The Sci-Fi weren't going to stop until they were dead. Finally, they reached the access tunnel, a small, cramped space that was barely wide enough for the group. Walker slid into the narrow corridor first, followed by Lena, Seth, and the others. The tunnel stretched out ahead of them like a lifeline, but it wasn't a guarantee. They didn't know what waited at the other end. "We're almost there," Lena whispered, looking back at the others. Her face was pale but determined. "The shuttle should be on the surface. We just need to make it through." But the moment they thought they were safe, a deafening explosion shook the walls of the tunnel, sending a shower of debris cascading down the shaft. The entire facility rumbled, as if the Sci-Fi were determined to bring it all down. The ground beneath their feet seemed to quake with every tremor, and Walker knew it wouldn't be long before the whole base came crashing down around them. "Move. Now," Walker shouted, urging the team forward as dust and smoke filled the air. The sound of collapsing walls echoed behind them, a constant reminder of the danger closing in. Ahead, the faint light of the surface glowed through the final tunnel opening. They were almost there, but as they emerged into the blinding light of the outside world, Walker's heart skipped a beat. A squadron of Sci-Fi warships hovered above them, their engines humming with the power of annihilation. They had been waiting. The shuttle was still in range, but the Sci-Fi weren't giving up. "We're not done yet," Walker shouted. Into the shuttle. Now. The final battle was not over. The Sci-Fi had come for them, and they would stop at nothing to ensure humanity's extinction. But Walker wasn't about to let them win. The team fought through the blinding light, weapons raised, and hope burning like a fierce fire inside them.